All right, our first question is for all speakers. As we are attending For the Love of Tomorrow, how do you see tomorrow and the future of interfaith?
I think until just recently, interfaith discussions was primarily a Western phenomenon. And I don't favor a globalization that would impose this process, as valuable as it is around the world. But it might be one that could capture its own value by initiatives and conversations, not only that we have here in the United States, but actually are taking place in the Middle East and a number of places that have been very encouraging in recent years, not the least of which, as many of you know, was the initiative of 138 Muslim leaders from a variety of countries and a variety of backgrounds in Islam called A Common Word Between Us. So personally, I think there's great hope.
I would like to say that I've been involved for many years with the interfaith struggle, and today we're in a better place than we were 5 years ago, a much better place than we were 10 years ago. But when Dr. Hathout was on that film, he was working with Rabbi Bierman and me on dealing with the danger of nuclear weapons. So we've been at it a long time. We need to keep remembering that it's a process, and that process is improving the relations that we have with each other.
We were just noting that there isn't too much room behind us back here as we were trying to get ourselves seated. And I kept thinking of the admonition of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who said, the whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is don't be afraid. And I try and keep that in mind whenever I'm at the interfaith table, and I've learned a great deal, end up feeling always my horizon expanded. But I think not being afraid and staying in the moment and not trying to work too hard on creating a future for interfaith relations, but rather embracing the present of interfaith relations is really where we should be. The future is whatever it will be based on whatever we do in the present, and if we do that better, then the present will build the future.
I think that there are several different modes of interfaith dialogue and exchange. There's a sort of informal one and then a more formal one. I think that informally, the whole concept of interfaith dialogue has always, in some ways, sort of baffled me because it's such a natural part of my life. That is to say, and I think that with regard to the relationship between Islam and the West, particularly, I think that perhaps a bit more could be invested in the manner in which Muslims in America relate to their Christian, Jewish, and non-denominational family members, neighbors, and friends on a daily basis. There is a lot of interfaith dialogue and interfaith interaction going on there. I think on the more formal level, and I'm going to speak here as somewhat of an outsider, one of the things that really concerns me is that it's very important for the faith communities to get together, at least for one reason. Sheldon Wallen, a professor at Princeton, talks about the phenomenon of voluntary totalitarianism. And by that he means that governments are often put in a position basically to do whatever they want to do because there's no credible opposition. And as long as the faith communities are so divided and alienated from each other, one of the things that does is it preempts the possibility of forging credible alliances and coalitions to keep our governments in check. So I would hope that the interfaith effort would be strengthened as we go into the future, because I think nothing less than our own freedom and the quality of government that we have is at stake.
Another question to all the speakers. Under what conditions does love require forgiveness if apology is not offered by the perpetrator of violence?
Gracious.
Notice how quickly we gravitate towards the microphones. There's the old saying, forgive and forget. I have trouble with forgiving. I never forget, especially if I've been done harm. So the question becomes, in my mind, on just a human level, if a person who has offended you shows no desire to change his or her behavior, for you to retain anger can be self-destructive. For you to forgive blithely can be naive. So the balance that I think has to be struck is to liberate yourself from a preoccupation that would cripple you interiorly because someone else harbors something against you. But be wary. Forgive the person and keep an eye on them.
I think non-forgiveness is one of the greatest dynamics for violence. And if we set up too much and too carefully construct the criteria by which I will offer forgiveness to another person, I think that is not peacemaking. I mean, if I had required all the people over those years at All Saints to come and apologize to me for some of the stuff they did before I, in the name of God and in my name, forgave them, we would be in a mess. So I think to put so much around what is required before we say, you're forgiven, and on my part, I'm going to move on. I think that is not helpful in creating the world that we want.
Far be it for me to disagree with one of my mentors, but forgiveness, I think that the urge to forgive or to grant forgiveness oftentimes puts responsibility on the wrong person in the situation or the wrong people in the situation. The people who have already been hurt now have pressure to forgive. There are some things, especially when someone does not apologize. I believe that apology is much more important than forgiveness. Apology addresses the situation and makes sure that we know that something was done that was incorrect, that was hurtful. And there are some things that people do that we can accept an apology and not necessarily forgive someone. But it doesn't mean that our lives are crippled, and it doesn't mean that our relationship is crippled. It's just different. It's different than it was, because every time we hurt someone and go through a process of apology and oftentimes forgiveness, but not always, when we do that, our relationships change, and they progress, and they move, and the new relationship is built on that negotiated settlement, as it were. If we're going to reach peace in the world, there is going to be too little apology, and there's going to be not enough forgiveness, but we're going to reach peace anyway. It's not dependent on either one, as far as I'm concerned. We need to make peace for the children about whom George spoke so beautifully earlier. That's the only reason that we need to do this. We need to save the innocents. And in order to do that, we need to get beyond what I consider to be a trap of apology and forgiveness.
Wow. Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, for me, it's important that I always keep in mind the fact that the Quran puts a positive value on the act of forgiveness. In fact, there are verses in which forgiveness is actually equated with good deeds, both of which are beloved by God. And so even in those instances where I find it very, very difficult to forgive someone, two things sort of nudge me in the direction of at least trying to forgive them. Whether I'm able to do that or not is another question. The first is that this, again, is an act that earns God's pleasure. The second is a bit more humbling. When I think about how difficult it is to forgive other people, I'm often reminded about how easy it is for me to forgive myself. And that double standard oftentimes is another motivating factor that nudges me in the direction of forgiveness. There is, however, a level on which I agree with the rabbi in that, if peaceful coexistence is contingent upon forgiveness, I think that we may be forfeiting opportunities that we would otherwise be able to capitalize on.
Now we get to targeted questions. So there's a question for the rabbi. Do the Jewish people in Israel not love the Palestinians? Do they not know their pain? How can we make peace between the Jews in Israel and the Palestinians? What is your solution?
Nobel Prize.
There's a tradition in Judaism that you're supposed to answer a question like that standing on one foot, just to make it a little harder. The answers are as complex as I tried to lay out. We do have to understand each other's pain. Had the privilege of going to Israel, Palestine with some of the people who are here sitting in this room. And we looked at this monstrosity that's dividing the Israelis and the Jews together from both sides. And the difficulty is to try and really understand both sides and grab both sides at the same time in order to really move forward. You have to understand that it is on the Israeli side a security fence, and it's worked. And on the Palestinian side, it's a horrible, vicious wall that screams hatred at the Palestinians every day. And those two things, obviously the wall stands, but as long as the wall stands, peace cannot stand. And so there's a great deal of work to do. But the first the first kind of work we have to do is see each other as equals, that our stories are different, our stories are similar, our narratives are strong, our narratives are vital, and we need to listen to each other's narrative and understand that we're not going to be able to change each other's narrative. And then not worry about forgiveness and not worry about apology. But at that point, we can create tomorrow. We can create the new day. And the only way that that's going to happen is if somehow those of us who've been trying to set an example for interfaith dialogue, for intergroup dialogue, that example will somehow spread and enable people to see that you really can sit down and talk with those people who you think were your enemy. It's vital that we do that.
I'm going to let Reverend Regas answer the question, which I couldn't understand, but it was directed to him.
The question is to discuss religious exceptionalism, is this the flow of modern religious thought? But any religion in its essence is found in the notion of being right, implying that others are necessarily incorrect. Part of the great pain that all of us in this room have suffered from is that religious blessing on saying, I alone am right. I mean, the Christian is the one most guilty of that. We're the ones that say, only by Jesus do you enter into a right relationship with God and eternity. And I think today religious thinking is looking at most critically at that exceptional posture from the Christian position. I can only speak from that. And I think that to assume that I'm in the right place, and if you're not with me, you are wrong, that has been at the heart of so much suffering and pain over the centuries. And so I just, as one Christian, I categorically deny that the Christian faith has some superiority over other religions. Now, some people would call that heretical, but I think that a lot of very strong Christian thinking is more and more moving towards seeing all religions together, and that Christ also offers some light in that. I still say that for me, God is best defined by Jesus, but God is not confined to what Jesus had to say. But it's a very theological, controversial issue.
I would like to add something, if I might, maybe from a little different angle. I think it's very important. This is a dangerous thing. Academics tend not to have this, and that is a certain reticence before the ambiguous. That is a certain hesitancy about marching in where angels fear to tread. As far as I'm concerned, this real serious interreligious dialogue is relatively recent, even in the West. We're going back maybe 100 years at most. So, at least in my view, it's relatively new. I'm not saying Father Rigas said this, but it could be said, almost, that what he has done is leveled all religions and had a new kind of imperialism that says they're all basically the same. That's tricky.
But I didn't say they're all the same.
I know you didn't.
Yeah, but
I said you could almost say.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we have to face is the difficulty that, for example, for me as a believing Christian, there's a fundamental disagreement about Jesus between me and Jews and Muslims. I assume that most committed Muslims believe that their tradition is true. They might say it's the most true. They might say it's the only truth. There are all kinds of variations. All right? But I think we have to accept, in all honesty, that difference, deal with it, work with it, stay face to face, and in time, through God's goodness, we might be able to work our way through, but retain throughout all of it a profound and deep respect for everyone, not only believer, but unbeliever as well.
Well, And I have to add what I was taught by my father, at least for us as Muslims. I am not allowed to say that Islam is better than or that Muhammad is better than. And according to him, that was an integral part of being Muslim, is that we are that very last link of the chain. Christianity and Judaism preceded us, and as Muslims, we're not allowed to say that Islam is better than either of them. The next question is for Professor Jackson. Can Islam in America embrace within itself the same kind of progressive, non-literalistic, post-supernaturalist theology that, while still a minority view, does exist in American Christianity and Judaism?
In a word, no.
Could I get a shortened version of I'm trying to get to the essence of the question. Let me just say this with regard to the theological future of Islam in the West. I think it's a categorical mistake to assume that if Muslims get serious about processing their theological data in the context of American reality, that will somehow result in a monolithic Islamic theology in America. I think that Muslim theology in America will probably be as pluralistic as Muslim theology has always been, and there has never been a single school of Muslim theology throughout the history of Islam. I doubt that the fact that Muslims begin more assiduously to confront, engage, and interface with American reality will necessarily produce an Islamic monolith. So what we're likely to see is a plurality of theological perspectives, even if all of them are fundamentally grounded in the whole enterprise of bringing the Islamic tradition into fruitful conversation with American reality and the American narrative. I think that the other thing that with 10 seconds add, I think that the whole question of, and I agree that you didn't say this, but I think that one of the implications could be, and this has perhaps some special implications for Islam, is that, well, if the idea that all religions are equally true becomes, if Christians lead that charge, will that then not place upon non-Christian religions the burden of following suit? And to the extent that they resist that, then they then become the new boogeyman. I think that for me the question is twofold. One, as deeply as I may believe in the core principles of Islam, I am aware that I might not be able to convince others of that belief, and that's fine with me. And for those whom I am not able to convince, or those who are not able to convince me, I have personally never been bothered by the whole notion of being excluded. Just leave the task of putting me in hell to God. Don't try and do it here on earth. But beyond that, the fact that Christians or Jews or others don't believe that my way is the right way, that in of itself doesn't bother me.
Our final question will be to all the speakers. What would your advice to the youth be in our exploration of peace as a form of resistance? And what do you think needs to happen for young people to be intrigued and participate in interfaith dialogue?
You want? I just think it's really important for young people to see credible examples of that. I think that young people are not going to be just swayed by our rhetoric. I think that there needs to be on the ground courageous, visionary people who take advantage of the various and sundry opportunities that present themselves to use peace as a means of resistance. And I think that young people have to see that in action. Otherwise, they would just chalk this up as just another bit of rhetoric coming at them from the religious community.
In Hebrew, the word for peace is shalom. It also means hello and goodbye, but it comes from the word shalem, which means whole or complete. And I think young people need to know that their lives are not complete if they are not constantly trying to expand and be with others. And I think part of what happens is that people become complacent, and our children become complacent. And what we need to do is encourage them, as my wife always says, just pretend to be brave. So we need, we need to enable them to pretend to be brave, to be world citizens, take their own identities with them, and move into the world and meet others and engage with others. And they're going to have to contrive these experiences. The more that we can help them do that, the more that we can support them in that goal, in that endeavor, the better the world is going to be. Otherwise, my fear is that for the most part, Muslim children will be with Muslim children, and Jewish children will be with Jewish children, and Christian children will be with Christian children, and that's not going to make the world better. We have to push them out of the nest and go along with them as far as we can, but also know that if they are empowered to do this, they will take the world in better places than we were able to get the world to by ourselves. So.
I think that when you look back at the 1960s, the 1970s, early 80s, when there was a draft, Vietnam War, young people were in the streets, and they were struggling and for peace. And it's disappointing to me that the youth of today do not have this vigorous need to get involved in political, social issues as a couple of decades ago. However, the interfaith work is the one place I think that we can engage young people in ways that we haven't in the last 10 years or so, that they see between us something happening that's rather miraculous, rather wonderful, that Jews and Christians and Muslims are together, arm in arm, struggling for peace and justice for the world. I think if ever there was something that could rally young people today, it is our being arm in arm, struggling together to deal with peace and justice throughout the world.
I have a couple things to say. One of them is sociologists have documented, at least in North America, to some extent in Europe as well, this growing number of nuns. These are not religious women. They are N-O-N-E-S. These are people who among the 20s, 20-somethings and 30, that say they're spiritual but not religious. I once said to somebody, I'm religious but not spiritual. But spiritual but not religious. That is, they don't belong. They might believe. And one of the problems we face, whether it's churches, whether it's mosques, whether it's synagogues, is that too often our establishments are not schools of spirituality. They don't really engage the people in a way that's vital at their core. So I think this is something that has to be really thought through by all of us. So we bear a certain responsibility for it. If I had to say what I hoped for young people, I would hope I have 3 S's. One is study. Of course, I'm a professor. I have a self-interest in this. But I would surely like to see young people immerse themselves in a tradition. If they don't immerse themselves in a tradition, like a religious tradition, they're much more vulnerable to the powers of contemporary culture. And it's very powerful. I talked about consumerism, I talked about individualism, and so on. Secondly, echoing Father Regas, service. Service, some type of commitment outside the self. Very important for the community and that. Finally, It's silence. Silence. The other day I was walking on campus. I was dressed like this. I saw a co-ed coming towards me, very actively texting. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to move. And I just stood there, and sure enough, she walked right into me. And she looked up and says, pardon me. And I said, God wants you to be more attentive.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank our distinguished speakers, and I will hand over the microphone for our MC to proceed with the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
In closing, we would like to show a brief documentary about the life of Dr. Hassan Hathout, and then we will close.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my true privilege to share with you the story of a very special person to me, my lifelong friend, professor, mentor, and father, Dr. Hassan Hathout. My father was born in Egypt on December 23, 1924. That was when he started a life which was blessed by unique talent, fostered with stubborn devotion, and crowned with immortal success. He traveled to preach Islam, the faith which he perceived as the beautiful culmination of Judaism and Christianity, and spoke of Muhammad, peace be upon him, the linking jewel for God's chain of prophethood to man. Because of Islam was the poetry he wrote, the academic medical career he chose, and the fine lady he selected as a wife. In 1948, he volunteered to serve as a physician in Palestine and received a thank you letter from the enemy camp for his humane treatment of their injured captives. When driven to Europe by political necessity, Dr. Hassan Hathout earned the topmost qualifications of his field of obstetrics and gynecology, and this was but one aspect of an enormous bank of self-acquired panoramic knowledge. Hassan Hathout is a man of God, a scholar of monotheism. For him, the concept of religion can be summarized in one word, and that is love. He was the keynote speaker at the first Eid celebration at the White House, 1999.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Quran says, Wallahu yad'u ila dar as-salam. God calls for the abode of peace. It is in peace and love, therefore, that we come to the White House, our house, as it is of all Americans. And we enjoy the full partnership with our American fellow citizens of all creeds, of all colors, of all backgrounds, fulfilling the Quranic saying, we have created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and the tribes that you get to know one another. What a beautiful prescription for societies afflicted with racial or color or religious divisions. And as we come, we are just emerging from our annual month-long exercise in soul purification and self-control. Again, values that are painfully disappearing in modern times. And we American Muslims are bent on recapturing these values for our country and through it for the whole world. And we aspire at joining other like-minded people, especially our co-religionists of the Jewish and the Christian faith, because to us they are co-religionists. They are the last link of the long chain proceeding from God, because the Quran tells us the same religion he established for you as the one he enjoined upon Noah, and that Quran we reveal to you, and that he enjoined upon Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, that you should steadfastly uphold the faith and break not your unity therein. We extend our hands, we open our hearts, and we will make it. It will come. Or else current civilization that carries in its body the seeds of its own destruction will crumble unless the followers of those three religions unite together.
He was the founder of the Interfaith Council of Southern California. He's been an invited speaker in many religious and interfaith locations, locally and nationwide, including the Wilshire Temple, Clearstill Cathedral, and United Methodist Church.
We are the fellow believers in the one God. And as followers of the common father Abraham, we are separate links in the one chain. And we are three branches stemming out from the same root.
In addition, he received many awards in interfaith and humanitarian communities, including the Olive Branch Award for his efforts in bringing Christians, Jews, and Muslims together. With science and ethics, he's bicultural, bilingual, as a speaker, thinker, writer, and poet. Throughout his battle with cancer, he wrote, Reading the Muslim Mind, and upon recovery from it, he wrote, Thus shall I stand before God, bihada al-qallah. Some of the numerous works he wrote in medical, ethical, and religious books, culminating with the latest, Audible Silence, Memoirs of a Muslim Elder.
People of the world, unite. You are one family. You share the grandparenthood of Adam and Eve, so behave like a family, handle one another like a family.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a brief glimpse of Dr. Hassan Hathout.
Thank you all for being here with us. This marks the closing of our program tonight. We look forward to working with you in the future. On your way out, please remember to fill out the cards on your tables and give them to the ushers at the exit. In the foyer, you can also receive copies of the videos you watched today. If you choose to participate in the book distribution campaign, you can pick up books for distribution to libraries and colleges in the foyer as well. For those who would like to pray Maghrib, we will be praying in 10 minutes. Perhaps it is a good omen that our gathering tonight was on the blessed Palm Sunday and the start of Passover week. We hope that our collective prayers will accelerate the path to peace and justice for our world. Thank you and good night.